All right, Ian, we have a Patreon, don't we?
Patreon.com/CU podcast. You
We're
go.
gonna get there.
We do. I do writings. I've got one. I just got.
It's in the drafts.
It's not interesting. I haven't done anything interesting in weeks. But I have one that I just have to put a closing paragraph on.
You got ice cream. What are you talking about?
We also you get the full video podcast.
And we are going to start doing
Hangouts. I did one last week.
We're going to start, I guess, in October or this month, later this month. We'll see. We'll start doing
got
exclusive.
to see Alan and Lisa and Tom. It was good.
We're going to start doing an exclusive podcast.
That's right.
As well. And I did not put down here for Ian to
$26 tier.
Another split, 54.46. That's like two. What did you say?
I said $26.
No, it won't be $26.
It's not going to be $26.
No. In second place, would video games be looked at differently if they were more physically exhausting? I like that one because I thought of it. And in the first place, at 54%, it finally broke through, Ian. Will computer games ever be as collectible as console games?
I don't think so. So there are people who really like their PC games and do collect them. They're out there, but there's a couple of reasons I think PC games are going to be less collectible or not. I don't want to say less collectible. There are definitely going to be some that are worth money. I don't think the market.
Right now, yeah.
Yes. I don't think the collectible PC game market is going to ever be as big as the collectible console game market. A couple of reasons. One, space.
Final Frontier.
One of the things that makes, I think, old PC games appealing to people to collect, especially PC games from, the 80s and 90s, is that they came in big boxes that commanded your attention. And they had big full color manuals usually in there. Sometimes they had a big chunky booklet of copy protection measures. Obviously,
Maps.
games like the Zork games had, feelies and little trinkets in it. And that's all very appealing. They look good on a shelf. So collectors who have space.
They look like books on a shelf.
Yeah, they look like books. So collectors who have the space, yeah, there is some real appeal to big box PC games. But I think, compared to like a PS2 game, a 360 game, an NES cartridge, even a complete NES game, you're taking up a fraction of the space. And when you talk to collectors and when you talk to them about getting rid of, when they talk about getting rid of collections, a lot of times one of the first things they bring up is, I just don't have the space anymore, or I don't want to take up the space. So space is one of them.
Space, the final frontier.
Two, digital gaming got into the PC realm and became acceptable in the PC realm a lot earlier than it did in console gaming. Way earlier. It's still not really fully accepted.
About 10 years before.
Yeah, in console gaming. So there's just a lot of stuff that doesn't really have a collectible item or unit. On top of that, as it got more and more into the internet age and things like serial numbers, single-use serial numbers
Early
and whatnot
2000s, yeah.
became necessary for playing these PC games as anti-piracy measures. That's another reason why PC games are never going to be as collectible, because when you collect cartridge games, ostensibly you're able to take that game, pop it into a system, and play it. There are certain big box PC games that if you buy and that serial number is used, sure, you can go and find a key gen or a cracker and use it. But as it stands, it could be like a spent game. You get what I'm saying? Like, there's not as much you can do with it. And then lastly, I just don't think there's as big of a nostalgia market for it.
No.
The era of PC gaming that is probably the most collectible, the big box PC stuff, the late 80s, early 90s, even into late 90s stuff, was all when computers were still prohibitively expensive for most people, and it was not as popular of a form of gaming as, say, a Sega Genesis, a Super Nintendo, or Nintendo. There are definitely people out there who do, but in terms of like the amount, there's not as many people who are super nostalgic over that PC game.
That's a good point. I mean, computers didn't become affordable for the regular, middle class income until like the mid 90s. That's when it really started to come down. So you're talking the first 15 years of games on a platform or multiple platforms that most families couldn't afford. Mm-hmm. I mean, my father bought an XT in 85, 86. He probably spent close to $2,000 for that. In 85 money, that's several $1,000s today. Like, we're talking tons of money.
The people who are going to be most nostalgic, I feel like, for some of those PC games are going to be older than us, probably a good 10 to 20 years older than us in certain instances, because they were the people, young tech professionals were the people who were getting into it.
Or adults, established adults.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So I feel like, the market for nostalgia, where you want to re-grab something for nostalgia, that lies with an older audience that may already be getting over it.
The people that played computer games in the 80s were boomers. They were our age then.
Yeah, a lot of them were.
So like
that market is gone. The people who would feel nostalgia for it are old or dead.
They're retired. They're 70. Like my father's over 70.
Yeah.
Like they don't care about that stuff. They don't have a huge attachment to a lot of that stuff anymore. The model train stuff is gone. So they've aged out of even the collectability. When you get to the 90s though, it explodes to teenagers then and some younger kids. So it's really like the 90s stuff. The 80s stuff though, here's the thing about it. I put down a couple of thoughts here. Unlike consoles, you don't have like dedicated libraries of games.
Sure.
For like the XT versus, for the Apple II versus the Commodore versus like I know anyone who had an Atari computer, like an Atari ST or whatever, or even 800. A lot of those games were shared between all of them, or at least a few of them, right? There weren't that many that were exclusive to one platform. Once you get to the Amiga, maybe some. Sure. But like you don't have that same experience. It's hard to have a collective. It's not like there's not like an IBM XT collectors forum. You can have a Nintendo collector forums or a Sega.
People who collect for PCs at this point, especially older ones, the ones who get really hardcore into it will have different computer setups that they can play the stuff on. But for a lot of people who are collecting this, and this does kind of go a little bit against what I said about the serial numbers, a lot of people who are collecting now are buying these things because they want them, but there's no real intention of ever playing them in the intended way. People, I mean, you've got stuff out there for all different platforms.
I have every platform. Yeah. Every platform, and it's like I'm not going to get my Apple II set up anytime soon.
There are definitely people who collect specifically for Apple II.
I would get that.
That is more specific, but there are a couple. There are definitely C64 collectors. But when you get into especially when you get into like the, I don't know. But
if I'm buying, let's say I want every King's Quest game, they don't have to be IBM versions. I can have an Apple II version. I don't care.
I feel like if we talk to I see what you're saying. I feel like if we talk to some big PC game collectors, there are probably some that are a little bit more specific about that.
I think I didn't grow up with a lot of those games on those shelves, so I don't care what platform I got them for.
I wonder if there's anything like the attempt to own the system of origin, basically like own the version that came out first.
A lot of times they came out about the same time. That's the thing. Sure. It's like I have the first. The one thing that's definitely a first is King's Quest came out in the IBM Junior. It's in that weird hard plastic box. That came out for sure first. Then all the other stuff, I mean, it's probably off by days or weeks for some of those. You know what I mean? So it's like, who cares? Like you're getting the Commodore done done the same exact time. A lot of times they're in the same box together for some of those. Sometimes you got multiple versions in the same. You know what I mean? You get in the same box. It's not all, but that happened. So there's not that pull to being like a shelf collector, to get the entire. If you're not a library collector, what happens? The popular stuff people go after, or maybe the really weird, rare stuff. All the shit in between, no one cares about it. There's not going to be a collectible market for 80% of these PC games.
Right.
You can find a lot of rare PC games. They're not worth anything. You can't find them, but if you find them, no one's buying them because there's not people that experience them and they're not collecting sets. The other thing I put down here was piracy. Obviously, piracy was rampant in the 80s and 90s for PC games. So if I played a lot of stuff pirate, I didn't. Most of my games were real ones in the 90s or shareware. I got more pirate stuff once I got to the late 90s. Once you got to T1 internet and college. If I pirated a lot of stuff, I don't have the nostalgia to get like the original box and game. I just wouldn't. Like, I'm not saying that speaks for everyone, but I think a lot of people would be like, yeah, I played a pirated, Abrams tank game in '86. Why do I need the original? So it doesn't carry through the same way.
I feel like the nostalgia is with PC games. I don't know how to say this properly. This isn't exactly right, but something along the lines of the nostalgia is more embedded in the actual gameplay. There's less of a, if you're downloading stuff from BBSs, if you're getting shareware, if you had pirated games, you're not really thinking about the packaging, you're not associating it with something. It's the gameplay that you remember. So when you want to feel like you can cure that nostalgia bug by going online and pirating that game.
Yeah.
And playing it.
So the first piece I've been collecting, I was ahead of the curve as I've been with most of these consoles, fortunately for my wallet. I started collecting PC stuff like 2012, 11. I got in pretty early. It hasn't really blown up until the past few years. It's gotten a lot hotter. And so the first stuff I bought, Ian, was the stuff I had as a kid or stuff that I remembered. You know, it was like I got, you know, I was searching for, that was the one specific one I wanted. I wanted the IBM XT version of Commando because that was the first computer game I ever had. So that's the one I did want the specific one of. Other ones I've gotten, though, have not been specific. I went out and got a lot of the Sierra stuff because I remember playing Sierra stuff. I got all the Leisure Suit Larrys, and I got the King's Quest, and I got the Space Quest, stuff like that. Those are the ones that drew me in. But then I stopped, or then I got some weird stuff. Like I got like the first edition of SimCity they pulled from shelves because it had Godzilla on it. They weren't allowed to use it. So I got some weird stuff like that. But it was stuff you had to have known about. And again, it's almost like computer collecting is right now where video game collecting was like in the mid 90s. Like we're just still figuring out stuff that exists. A lot of the rare stuff isn't worth any money or even weird variants that I've shown Ian. Like this is the weird Blakestone variant that you can't find, but like no one cares because we're not into it yet.
Sure.
You know, so yeah, that's all I'm going to say. So will there eventually be graded computer games? Absolutely. That's going to be like the final frontier. Computer games is always like the final frontier for video game collecting for the reasons we talked about and probably more. And we'll get there eventually. You know, we will. It won't be every single game, but you know, and the other thing though is that I think that also the golden age of computer gaming, a lot of people was like the mid 90s or so. So it's like it's a lot easier to find those games. Maybe not a sealed Doom 2, you know, commercial, but you can find those. They're 25 years old. You know, I'm sure you can find those. We're not talking stuff from the mid 80s. There's not many people saying, "Oh, well, Space Quest 1, you know, that's going to be $100,000 game." Not really, because it's not like that's a franchise that's continued. A lot of the franchises that continued are from the 90s.
Yeah.
And on.